Hello and welcome to Out Loud. I'm your host, Greg Thompson, and on today's show, our season finale, we're going to change it up. Our trusty editor, Meg McEllen, is here in the studio with me today and will be interviewing me. Thanks for being on the show with us, Meg.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so folks should know right off the bat that Meg McEllen is not just the editor on our show, but she is also my sister. Meg has been working on the show with me since it started and was part of the process in conceiving Out Loud at its inception. Meg is also a graduate of Longwood University in Virginia. Having studied English there, she has since worked in various roles, primarily now as a legal assistant. While at Longwood, Meg also met her now husband, my brother-in-law, AJ. Meg is also a new mom to her daughter, my niece, Lexi, who is really, really adorable. And Meg is also an avid listener of podcasts. Meg identifies as straight with the gender pronouns she, her, hers, and is Roman Catholic. And she'll be hosting this interview with me today. So take it away, Meg.
Okay, so again, thank you so much for having me. As you said in my bio, I identify as straight, so I am not a member of the LGBT community. I have, however, always considered myself to be an ally. So with that said, please feel free to jump in or correct my phrasing or verbiage where needed. I know, more than happy to correct me. So please, hop on in where needed or if you think we need some clarification on something. So, all right. So for a little bit of background on you, Greg, you went to William & Mary for your undergrad, and that's in Williamsburg, Virginia. You studied marketing and film. After that, you worked in communications at a Catholic church, and you've done digital marketing consultant for small businesses as well. Last year, you moved from Virginia to Nashville to get your master's in Theological Studies at Vanderbilt University. You are Roman Catholic. You identify as gay with the gender pronouns he, him, his.
Sounds good.
Sounds about right? All right. So just to kind of hop right in there, just to like get it out of the way. Just first question,
right.
the first question, same one for some of our other interviews as well. So if we just get it out of the way.
Yep.
So you identify as gay. Can you please tell me what that term means to you and how you came to briefly identify with that term? I know we're definitely going to unpack this a little bit more later, but what's your quick, we say like the elevator speech, what's your quick?
All right, back to business school. I think that, it's fascinating because I feel like the term gay is an evolving one. So this is going to be hard to make it an elevator speech. And this is a hard question. Being gay is a term that has really evolved for me over my lifetime. I remember growing up in grade school and people saying, "Oh, that's so gay," and so I think growing up it was an insult. Is what the word gay meant, as like that's silly or that's stupid. And so it wasn't until I made friends in college who came out to me, where I actually knew someone who was gay, and then I slowly came to identify with that term, if you will, but came to understand my sexual orientation over time as well. And so I think for me, though, the word gay has never been that derogatory term. Like I've always seen it as like a joyful term. And it is a joyful term, like we hear it in Christmas songs, mm-hmm. and so I've always been like, wait, why is that term derogatory sometimes? And so as I've come to identify with it, and then like almost as I've come to understand my sexual orientation, I've been reclaiming that word, gay, mm-hmm. and it's been this like joyful reclaiming over time. So does that?
Yeah, that's like really well said. Yeah,
okay.
I know. And I think it'd be interesting. You mentioned, English background. I think of the Oxford English Dictionary, and it'd be interesting to see how that term evolved, because when you look back in some of the older, songs, or you watch, White Christmas. Every Christmas is my favorite Christmas movie. So I watch that, and they'll use the term, gay meaning happy.
Right.
And then so I'd be interested to see.
Yeah, they use it in the dialogue in that movie.
Yes.
Like, oh, you're so gay.
Yeah.
And it's just like,
And so I'd be interested to see kind of the evolution, and I'm not remotely prepared to talk about that in any more than just like,
I didn't prep
I'm now
to
gonna go
quote
home.
Christmas songs, but
yeah, and I did not bring my Oxford English Dictionary, but I'd be interested to see like where it took that turn. But anyway, I don't want to digress digress too far because, again, I
Sure.
totally didn't bring
That's
that
a whole different episode, is like the etymology of the word gay.
right, and how
And
we
then
got
the
here.
rest of the LGBT acronym. Yeah. We
Yeah,
could do that later.
but I do think it's interesting, though, growing up, that was definitely, it was very flippant. It was either flippant or an insult or some combination of the two. And then
Yeah.
now it's kind of coming back to where it is more of a descriptor. It is, you're kind of the reclaiming of that word.
Well, it can still be an insult.
Oh, very true.
I think it can definitely still be an insult, and still is an insult, especially in like middle schools and high schools in our country. But for me, it's been like growing up and coming to understand the other side of that word.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So real quick too, we've addressed this in the other interviews so far, and I kind of want you to elaborate a little bit on why it's important. We address the pronouns kind of out of the gate.
Yes.
So as a person who identifies as straight, it's pretty cut and dry, pretty simple. So it just sounds, kind of superfluous. Sounds kind of extra.
Right. You being a cisgendered woman, your gender pronouns are she, her, hers, and that's that.
Pretty boring.
Why do we need to go over this?
Yeah. So can you kind of like elaborate a little bit on that, like why you felt it was important to address that in the interviews up to now, and then why it's just important for someone like me to be aware of that going into talking to somebody who's a member of the community?
Sure. That was using gender pronouns was something that I wasn't aware of until I was in the classroom at Vanderbilt Divinity School. And that's one of the things that we use in our introductions on like syllabus day, on the first day of class. It's like, all right, everyone go around the room and tell us your name and like why you want to be in this class, and tacked on to like tell us your name. Every professor, pretty much without fail, would say, please provide your gender pronouns. And that can be confusing for folks because, like I said, it can be kind of common sense, like, oh, I'm a man, I'm a woman, like these are my gender pronouns. But it's a really important tip of the hat towards the T in LGBT for the transgender community, and helping folks who are perhaps transitioning or have transitioned or even identify as intersex, or the parts of the acronym that aren't as clearly explicit, I am male, I am female, or if you don't identify with those gender norms of male and female, it allows those individuals to be heard. And so you have, there are multiple choices, but the most common are male identifying he, him, his, female identifying she, her, hers, and then you have they, them, theirs. And that's more often used for someone who's in transition or does not identify as male or female. And admittedly, this is something that I came out 2 years ago, but it wasn't until I was part of a more robust, more formally organized LGBT community within Vanderbilt Divinity School, where people were advocating, no, we need to use these pronouns to make specifically transgender folk feel seen and addressed properly in the classroom. So that's where that comes from, and that's why that's something important we do on the show.
I would say I feel like that's important. I think it's just as important. We ask somebody growing up in the, going to school, it'd always be, what name do you prefer to go by?
That's exactly it.
So I feel like it's a part of that as well.
Yeah,
like,
it's
like
part
how
of,
can I show respect to you?
Right, and respect is something we've addressed on the show here. It's knowing someone's name, and in this case, knowing someone's pronoun is just knowing how to address them more informally. That's all. How do you want to be called? That's what's at the heart of that question.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate that. I feel like that it's something we've kind of maybe glossed over this season. I don't think we point blank addressed it. So I kind of wanted to just kind of fill in that blank.
No, thank you. Because that's why I'm glad you're conducting the interview as a straight ally to help explain some things. And that's part of the purpose of this show, is to provide community for the LGBT community and as far as faith goes, but then also to provide insight for allies and to help all of us just understand each other better.
Definitely.
This is one element of that.
Definitely. All right. So you talked a little bit about growing up. I know it's kind of funny with me being your sister. So tell me your side of things. But if you could tell me a little bit about your family dynamics and growing up and kind of how that impacted you, or thoughts.
Sure. I think my elevator speech, if you will, for a lot of people about growing up is that we were raised, you and I were raised in a Navy family. And so the implication with that is that we moved a lot. I feel like that's a big theme
Mm-hmm.
for me in my life, is that I've constantly been kind of pulled out and put into new situations and had to like make new friends kind of on the fly, which is not something I like to do at all. So making friends is hard, and
It
I
is.
think it's getting harder today.
Yes.
Again, another episode. But um, growing up in a Navy military family, for us meant that we moved up and down the coast a lot. And so it wasn't until like middle school and high school that we lived in the same town for a while. And so I had a good like 8 year stretch in one town. And then for college, I had a good like 4 year stretch
Mm-hmm.
in the same place too. So it's really important for me to kind of have that consistency.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one like element of family that kind of seeps into my life still now, is I like finding my people and staying with my people. That being said, family's super important to me because in the midst of all those moves, your immediate family is what is your constant.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all you have sometimes. And so yeah, that's big. And then I think faith is a natural part of answering this question too. Being raised in a Roman Catholic family, um, with our mom coming from a predominantly Roman Catholic family, and our dad being growing up a Southern Baptist, but going to church with us in the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
So so Catholicism is another major thread. We went to Catholic school, or I went to Catholic school, K through 5, and then middle school and high school I went to public school. But even in that, even while I was going to public school, we were always good as a family about going to church on Sunday, being in whatever religious education program you needed to be, or the church said you needed to be in at that time, praying before meals, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
praying before bed, everyone gathering on the bed and kind of talking about their day. And so family is a big part of my faith. And then especially, even in those college and more adult years, more recently, family is interwoven with faith still, because I encounter through my faith other people that I really closely identify with. And so even though I live in a city now that's far away from my family, I find my local chosen family, if you will, through my faith a lot of the times, because that's the community that I was raised in.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you talk about being raised Catholic, and you still identify as Catholic, and we're definitely going to get to this later. But
Okay.
what do you think? Like, what was the impact of kind of going to Catholic school and being raised in Catholic community, but also kind of specifically, if maybe you need that narrowed down a little bit, you went from Virginia Beach Catholic school being the majority, moving to Lynchburg, where, a very Christian community, but the Catholic community was definitely not as robust as it was in Virginia Beach, I feel like. So going from the majority to minority,
Mhm.
and still maintaining faith through that, what did that look like for you? Like, what impact do you think that's had on you?
That's a great question. You're hitting on another theme in my life. Well done. I um when we moved as a family from Virginia Beach to Lynchburg, Virginia, that not only was a big move for me, this was, again, that same move we talked about a moment ago about me starting middle school, and I was switching from Catholic school to public school. And at the same time, our, yeah, we as Catholics, our family as a Catholic family suddenly was a minority in this
Mm-hmm.
town. And that was really not something I fully understood being 10 years old at the time. But I started to find that I had to have some answers more readily available. And this more applies to you, Meg, but like you had people in high school asking you, "Are you saved?" And as a Catholic, that's not terminology we use a lot. And so, learning what's underneath that question that someone's asking me about, ultimately like salvation and are you going to heaven, um, what is my answer to that as a Catholic was something that we had to sit down as a family and kind of like talk through and work through. And, but for me, it's interesting. I was just reminiscing about this with a friend the other day. My friendship circle in Lynchburg, Virginia, of all places, was surprisingly religiously diverse. I was friends with someone who was Jewish, Mormon, non-denominational, atheist, Methodist, and probably a few others that I'm not thinking of right now. But I was the only Catholic in my friend group. But everyone was the only something in this little friend group of ours. And we were all, and for the most part, we all happened to be in band together. Marching band was a really big thing for me. So a lot of us were in band together. Or we were just in classes together and we just got to know each other. So that was something unique about my friend group being in Lynchburg, again, of all places, was that was a place where I learned how to be around folks of other faith traditions and talk or not talk about religion. And I think really in that space, learn to love others and not really worry about are they saved or not. Like, it's funny that question came up so much there because I didn't ever have a doubt that someone who I loved, who I knew was doing good in this world, was not going to go to heaven. That just was, I knew instinctively that wasn't a judgment first off for me to make, but that wasn't something that I had to question or even really talk with them about. I just knew them for who they were. Their identity wasn't defined by their faith necessarily. So that was a big lesson I started to learn in high school. And then in college, ironically, with a more diverse offering of people for everyone, you go into college and you find your people, or you join this club that you never had back home or something. And in college, I ended up getting really involved in my campus ministry. And then suddenly my friend group switched to being very homogeneously Catholic. And so then it's been I think it's been 9 years since I started college. And now, a year into graduate school, that I'm around at Vanderbilt Divinity School. It's a multi-faith institution. That was one of the reasons I wanted to go there to study theology, was because I didn't want to just be around other Catholics. So this, as far as like how I was formed in those early years in Lynchburg, ironically, that helped me start to build an interfaith dialogue of sorts, and really more just like an interfaith spirituality. We didn't talk about our faith traditions, like I said, but there was a love for one another that was greater than where you went to church on Sunday, and that's stuck with me ever since.
Kind of moving from that into your coming out story, you came out while you were working at the Catholic Church.
Yes.
Can you tell me what that was like for you?
It was a lot of things.
All the things.
It really, I mean, it's coming out has all these elements to it, and you come out to different people and you get different reactions, for better or worse. I had been working at this Catholic church for just short of 3 years, I think, at that point. And well, first I'll tell you like when I came out to myself, and then because that transitions really nicely into coming out at my church.
Okay,
it was all intertwined.
Back it up.
Sure. Yeah. So so I had been in DC with a friend for the weekend visiting, and I had recently come out of a relationship and was single and trying to figure out, like when you break up with someone, all these questions start to come up of like, what am I looking for?
Mm-hmm.
What do I want out of a relationship in this world?
Sure.
And up until this point, and this was January of 2016, just to give you like a timeline or rough idea of time here. I had up until that point, I had been dating girls, and so I'd just gotten out of a relationship, was asking all these questions about what am I looking for. And I was chatting with my friend while visiting her in the DC area, and we were talking about online dating. And anytime you bring up online dating with a friend, it's like, oh my gosh, like, what are you doing? Like, what app are you on? What's your strategy? How do you stay safe? Like,
Which
what
is
are
so funny because coming from somebody who's been like I met my husband in college, and so kind of
right?
before the internet was really
Yeah.
big. Like AIM was how we communicated to date.
Oh, instant messenger. Yeah,
Yes, like that was like the beginning. So when you say apps, I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I have no idea what that's like.
it's okay.
It's rough.
And everyone has different opinions on this. Again,
Yeah.
another episode. But it, she was using Tinder, and Tinder was still fresh at that point. Like maybe it had been out for a year, or at least it had been like hot for a year.
Yeah, definitely.
And I don't know the full Tinder history, but not a professional in that. But I had never done online dating because everyone I had dated was from school or something. And so I was now adulting and trying to figure out, okay, how does one? And so this friend of mine said surprisingly positive things about Tinder, and was giving me all these tips about like how to kind of field people as you message them. Because when you swipe right on someone and then someone swipes right on you, which is an indication of like I like you on both sides, and when you mutually like one another, you hop into text messaging with them. You still don't know their phone number or even their full name. You just know that what's on their profile. And so you only have that to go off of. And she was giving me some tips for just like how to chat with people. And really all I remember was like, really just chat with people, like genuinely be you, strike up a conversation with them, try to keep it going for a little while. And so she made it sound not scary. And so I was in town, and I was like, I'm going to just open this app, and while I'm in DC, and I wasn't living in DC at the time, so I was like, while I'm in this town that I'm never going to come back to, how about I just explore this app, swipe left or right on people, and just see what happens. And then I'll go home and I'll do this the right way. But like, let me just play the game while I'm invincible and nothing's going to happen.
That could happen?
What's the worst that could happen? So so like the next morning, I was laying in bed, and I'm an early riser, so I was up like hours before my host had gotten up, and that's normal and totally fine. And so I downloaded the app and I started looking for folks on Tinder. And on Tinder, you set your profile, and I just said I'm a man seeking women, and started going through the options, going through the deck of cards that Tinder provides for you. And as I was doing that, I just kept swiping left, which was dislike, on all these girls. And then in the privacy of this bed at my friend's apartment, with no one else up to look over my shoulder or to say anything to me in another town where I didn't live, I switched the filter and I said, I'm a man seeking men. And that was huge. I pressed that one button, and then pictures of guys in town started popping up, and they popped up, and I was like, I'm just gonna swipe left and just see what people's profiles are like, because I was studying. I was being a total student about this. I was studying people's profiles, and I was there to see what was working, what was not, so I could craft my profile,
definitely
make it perfect
for
when
research.
I got into town. Exactly.
Sure.
Market research.
Sure.
And so I was swiping left on folks, and then I got to someone who I couldn't swipe left on. He was really cute, and I was like, I can't do this to you.
I like you.
And so I swiped right, and then I swiped right on someone else and on someone else. And I don't even know if I chatted with those people, because it was like 6 or 7 in the morning. So like no one was on their phone getting a notice that I had liked them.
Yeah.
And I had just created my profile, so no one had liked me back yet. I hadn't been online for more than like 20 minutes. So that was how I started to come out to myself, through modern technology, which is perfect given that I'm a communications person of sorts. So so then a week later, I was in, I sound like this cool traveling person. I was in New York City like a week after that. It's not the life I live, but we had some tickets to a show there, and I went up to New York City with a friend of mine, a colleague, at the church I was working at, and we went to go see my first Broadway show, and
Which was?
Chicago.
Oh, so good.
It was good. It's really good. It was
I
a
mean,
good standard.
I've heard there's some, I've heard good
You know,
reviews.
I mean, it was. Oh yeah. I mean, it
a
was
little production.
It was a revival, and there were some things that you could take or leave. Everyone had their opinions, but what was great about it, sidebar, was that Paige Davis from Trading Spaces played Roxy, and like halfway through the show, we realized it was Paige Davis, and we were like so excited. And then my friend tweeted at her, and then Paige Davis, while like in the intermission, tweeted back and said like, "Thanks for like being here," and we were like, "This
That's
is
pretty cool."
Sidebar closed. So then, after the show, we were in a little dive bar in Greenpoint, kind of in the Brooklyn area. And again, safe space, far from home, no judgment. And this friend of mine had already indicated that like she had some relatives who were gay. And so I kind of knew that like this was someone I could talk to. And so I just wanted to like say to someone, like I wanted to feel the possibilities of like being gay with someone where I had some room to
figure it out.
To figure it out, yeah, and not to feel like to be able to say what I said to her was like I think I like guys, and to be able to say that and then be able to like take it back if I needed to.
Yeah.
Like I was still really hesitant about this identity.
Yeah, I think I like.
Yeah, exactly. I think I was corrected on that very quickly after coming out to a few people. And so we just had a really good conversation, and so I came out to her, and then I think the second person I came out to was maybe the second or third person I came out to was my pastor. And we got together for drinks after work one day, and I said the same thing. I think I'm gay, and he was like, "No, Greg, you're gay." And
he's like, "I love you, both."
like it's okay. And so to go back to the question that you asked, like coming out while working at a Catholic church was they were one and the same. I was immediately bringing in the people closest to me in this job I was in, and kind of being like, okay, this is something I'm learning about myself. Can you help me walk through it? And so we did. And then over time, started to come out to family, started to come out to other people in the parish, slowly but surely, all the while kind of fielding like, who's going to be okay with this? And really still trying to, I think, create like those safe spaces so that I could still figure it out as I went.
Definitely. So you've kind of addressed some of my other questions. Can you tell me more about what it was like coming out to your family? So I know from what you've said, it was some safe spaces out of town, but then now you're back in town, and now you have this realization. And I know you lived in the same town as mom and dad at the time, so
Yeah, so that was coming out to my parents was really quick for me because they were living 10 minutes away from where I was living at the time in Virginia. And so we were at mass together. I was going to church with them, and then we were having like brunch afterwards. And this was a tradition of ours that had started since they moved into town. And so I was at church with them, and on one Sunday in particular, this was a few weeks after I had come out, I started dating. I actually started using Tinder and went on my first date with someone who I really liked and who I'm actually still dating. And he and we had a great time. And so that Sunday I went to church with my parents, and then I remember just being in the pews, and I don't know what song was playing or what, but I was filled with emotion and even some tears just being in the pew with them and realizing that I wasn't being true to them. And I'm a really bad liar. So
this is so
I
true.
had it.
True.
They hadn't like asked point blank anything about my dating life recently, but I already felt like I was hiding something from them because of how close our relationship was. And And I've grown a lot closer with mom and dad since graduating college and just being an adult in the world and stuff. So I really felt like I was hiding something from them. And so the next day, I texted mom and said, "Can we get dinner?" And
Why?
exactly, her response was like something
I
to the
love
effect
you.
of like, "What's wrong? Like, why do you want to? It's Monday. Like, we just had dinner yesterday. Why do you want to get dinner tonight?" So so I went over to the house and she made some dinner, and I'm just like sitting there awkwardly, like, how am I going to do this? And by do this, I mean come out to mom, because I couldn't sit on this for more than 48 hours. It was I'm
I
that
must
bad
tell
of
you
a
right
liar.
now.
I must tell you right now. Um, and so by then I had talked to a few friends, so I was affirmative at that point. I was affirmative. By that I mean, like, I didn't say I think I'm gay. I said I'm gay, and I said this to her, and um, it was tough. Not bad. It wasn't bad. But mom's response was surprised, because I don't know if she had suspected it or not, but it felt like this was something that I had been hiding from her. And so we had to just kind of talk through, like, okay, how do you know?
Mm-hmm.
And some of those questions that people might find insulting, I didn't find insulting because this was my mother, and these were things that I had come to terms with kind of on my own, and I had to bring her into the loop about. And I think um, Luther said this on an episode of this show, that like this is something that's been so many years in the making for me. Luther was quoting his partner, and who said that, this has been 27 years in the making for me. I can't expect someone to be on board in a matter of minutes.
Yeah.
It's a process. So we just sat at the table and talked for a while, and we kept talking and getting together and doing that. But it was not so. What I will say is that um, it was not at all ambiguous to me that mom didn't love me any less at all.
Oh, definitely.
It was just this element of surprise that came
Mm-hmm.
with coming out. That happens when you come out to people, and so we just had to work through it.
Definitely.
So that was kind of a similar process with the family, I think, in general. And we ended up having like a family powwow once I had talked to each family member like individually. We all kind of got together and
There's
had
only four of
drinks.
us. You talk to mom, mom talk to dad, you talk to dad, then you talk to me.
Correct.
You make it sound like
Word gets around fast.
Right.
Greg has something to tell you.
No, that was
So-
literally the conversation was, because I call mom almost every day and we talk all the time, and she was just like, you need to talk to your brother. And I was like, well, how was your day? She's like, you just, because she can't lie or keep both, but you're the same person sometimes. It's so funny. And she's just like, you just need to talk to your brother. And I'm like,
Go.
okay.
So
So mom says we need to talk.
so yeah, so that's what we did, was we talked, and that's what we do as a family. We talk. We get together for
Yeah,
meals and we sit
we
and we
do.
talk. And it wasn't, the questions were never like this prodding, like it was never, the questions were never derogatory, or
Sure.
it was everyone was just trying to understand
Mm-hmm.
something that was new to them.
Mhm.
So that was the process with family. But it's, I think it's profound in a way that it started with church. Like it really, it came to me sitting at church with my parents and knowing I have to tell them. I can't hide this from them. For better or worse.
Definitely.
And it was for better. It was definitely for better.
Yeah, I think I agree. I know when you chatted with me, it was, you said, I need to talk to you. And then it was, this statement, and it was, I am gay. And I remember, like, in my head, just kind of calling a quick timeout and evaluating, really quickly, how do I respond to that? Because there's two ways, either
Yeah.
I can hop on the train, or and just kind of accept this and ask some questions along the way, or or I could or it could go, I guess, the other way. And I just remember like being like, okay. And I remember it being such a big shock, because I grew up with you knowing, that the Catholic Church meant a lot to you. You're very religious, very spiritual. So that was, and mainly just because you'd always dated women up to that point. So I think that was kind of I know where the shock came for me. But what's funny is then I remember I had a friend came over shortly after you and I had talked, and I came into the living room, and I was just like, I just had this look of, I was still processing, and he's like, what's going on? I was like, my brother's gay. And he looks at me, he's like, yes.
We know.
Yeah, we know.
And that was the response I got from some people, was just
And?
like, yeah, we knew you were gay. You just hadn't figured it out yet. I was like, okay, thanks for, not keeping me in the
Yeah,
loop
right?
this whole
Thanks
time.
for telling me.
Thanks for telling me. Raw, honest moments like the one you just heard are why I love working on this show and why we want to keep on producing Out Loud for a second season. Our aim is to take these conversations of faith and sexuality to even more pockets of the LGBTQIA+ community, here in Nashville especially. So if you want to be a part of that journey with us, here's something you can do. Just join our mailing list. Hop on to OutLoudStories.com and click the button to join. You'll get new episode notifications and sneak peeks at what to expect for season 2 as we get it ready. Again, that's all at OutLoudStories.com. And that's it for announcements in the middle of this episode. Let's get back to the show.
All right. So moving on to the faith piece a little bit. So
Sure.
when I tell people about the podcast or about you, up to now it's been about you, and now it's all about the podcast. But so we'll pick on the podcast. So the first question, like this morning I was at work, and the first question was, so what's it about? And I'm like, well, so our podcast is about members of the LGBT community,
Right.
and how they identify, and then how that impacts their faith.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, you're straight. I'm like, yes. And then I'm like, well, my brother's gay. And they're like, he's gay. And he's Catholic? And I say, yes.
Also a normal question, yes.
And so I know you've gotten some semblance of that question. So how do you kind of respond to that? How did you unpack that a little bit? How do you, being gay and being Catholic?
Yeah. That is, it's an ongoing journey for me. Growing up in a Catholic family, and just growing up Catholic in general, going to Catholic church for 26, going on 27 years now, it's part of who I am. Another theme that's kind of come up as we've interviewed people here has been that, my sexual identity doesn't define who I am. And I think if you ask some people about their faith, that's a response I get sometimes too, is I'm not just Catholic.
Definitely.
And some people will fight on the other side of that, and that's fine.
Whatever works.
Whatever works for you. But I think at the heart of that statement is like, I'm not only this one thing. Like, I am a multifaceted person. I am made up of many passions and loves and hates and all kinds of different things. So, so for me, being Catholic and being gay, those are two parts of my identity. They're not the only things that define me. But being Catholic is really, this is something also that we talked about in Maria's interview this season, is that I love something that she said, that Catholicism was something that wouldn't let go of her.
Mm-hmm.
And when she said that to me the first time, I completely understood where she was coming from. And to explain, I'll say that like Catholicism is something, if you've ever been to a Catholic mass, it's steeped in ritual. Now that I'm studying theology, especially, I'm reading even creeds that I, in a Catholic liturgy, recite with the congregation. And the words are so similar today as to what they were written in 300 to 500 AD.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a faith that's really steeped in history and tradition. And so there's something, and I even took a class on ritual this semester in liturgy, and it's been really good studying liturgy myself to kind of find that like there's something comforting for the body at worship that comes to a space and knows what to do, knows what to say, when to stand, when to kneel, all those things that kind of drive people crazy when they come to a Catholic
Yeah.
Mass for the first time if they haven't been to a liturgy like that, where there's lots of standing and kneeling and reciting. All of those things are really surprisingly comfortable when you do them a lot. And it's almost like if you, depending on what your prayer life is like, it's nice when you find like a routine with prayer where you're like, this is how I'm going to sit down and kind of go through my day or talk to God about something that's on my heart. So like something I have been doing for a while is like the daily examine, and I don't do it daily, but I like that there's if you look it up, it's a Ignatian Jesuit practice of prayer where you very simply I'll say it goes through being thankful for your day, kind of walking through your day and playing it back in your head, expressing regret for anything that you feel like you may have done wrong that day, and then praying for other people or for yourself, creating those intentions based on what your reflections are for the day. And you can do that in about 10 minutes pretty thoroughly, although sometimes I do it way too quickly or sit there and contemplate my day for an hour, if time allows. But what I'm saying with that is that there is something really comforting about sitting down and knowing the process that works for you for encountering God. And that looks different for everybody. And that is something that I have done as a Catholic for a very long time, go to Mass every Sunday. And some of us roll our eyes at the Sunday obligation of going every Sunday. But there is something really, again, this like muscle memory ritual that is behind the practice of getting dressed, getting in your car at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, whenever, and going to this place, going to sit down in a pew and acknowledge that there is something greater than yourself. And it may just be the person next to you is greater than yourself at that moment, but however you want to define that for you in that moment. So that's kind of how Catholicism is within me, and something that isn't necessarily letting go of me. That being said, Catholicism is also more or less adamant about homosexuality being a bad thing. And I can say that because in the Catechism, which is essentially the statement of beliefs for the Catholic Church, it says very clearly that homosexuality is intrinsically disordered. And that's a hard statement for people to get around. And
Definitely.
so that's the question. You're gay and Catholic? What? That's where that comes from. Because that's probably what people know best, is that the Catholic Church is like, no. Okay, so we said gay marriage is okay in the U.S., but that doesn't mean that the Catholic Church is on board with blessing gay couples in the sacrament of matrimony. And so then that's where, when people ask me this question, this is where it depends on your theology. And what I mean by that is, when you see this statement intrinsically disordered, do you take it for what it is and implicitly trust the church, which is what the church teaches, is to accept that there is divine authority behind these teachings. And there's something beautiful to that there is this tradition and these laws or rules, whatever you want to call them, depending on the document, that have been divinely inspired over the ages, have been thoroughly examined by philosophers and theologians for centuries. This has been given a lot of thought, whatever the document is. I'm not just referring to homosexuality there. And so, but on the other side, again, going back to what your theology is, there are those who implicitly accept all that they are told. And then there are those who question. And maybe all of us question, but how we act is a little different. And so when I read that, and when I opened up the Catechism, really and truly, after coming out to myself and to family, I as an academic of sorts now. I wouldn't have identified as an academic when I came out. I wasn't in graduate school. I was just working. I immediately was like, well, what is that referring to? What's the footnote? Which book in the
Yeah,
Bible
where
are
does
we
it say
talking
that?
about?
Yeah.
Where, like, what is your support for this claim? Going back to like AP English, claim support. How are you building your argument?
Cite your
You got to show
sources.
me what you're talking about here. Explain yourself, which I don't think is asking for much. It's just because I trust that. Okay, so if I'm trusting that this tradition is steeped in this knowledge, show me what you're talking about. So, and then this is where people get divided, is that if you go to really examine the catechism or the scripture that it cites or the Catholic encyclicals doctrine that it cites from there on, it you can interpret things kind of one way or the other as far as what the church means by homosexuality based on documents that I'll say rather broadly don't have a word for homosexuality yet. It wasn't, St. Paul didn't have the word homosexual in his vocabulary when he was writing his letters in the New Testament, or his letters in what we now know as part of the New Testament. He was perhaps referring to two men being together, but there's some euphemisms kind of at play even in the Bible where it's like, well, what were they referring to? And that takes like a historical lens to really understand. So that's my long way of saying, like, there are people fall on different sides of this. And for me in particular, it starts in the heart and what I feel is true there. And then I start to build from there kind of what it is I believe. Because I believe I'm attracted to men. And so then I have to kind of build some of my theology around that, like it or not. And and so people fall in different lines with this. Why am I still Catholic? That's an ongoing journey, is finding a community where I feel accepted. Catholic doctrine is still, for the most part, something that I have been raised in and agree with, but there are parts of Catholicism that are controversial for many people, myself included, and that we wrestle with. And I think that's true for a lot of us in any faith community or any club or organization, is that you may come to a point where you don't agree with everything that's going on here, and you have to decide, is it worth staying, or is it time to go somewhere else where my views are better served or respected?
Because I know, even as somebody who's straight and Catholic, there are pieces of the doctrine that I don't personally agree with, or I say, you know, I see your point there, but you know, this might, you know, this is reality. This is where we are. So it's something that I know I look at, and especially is on the forefront of my mind as I look at my daughter, and we obviously want to get her baptized, but I kind of look at, you know, what is she going to hear? So part of the perk of getting her involved with the Catholic Church is you get people outside the home that are reinforcing, you know, what you're doing inside. But I have to be aware that I want to make sure we put her in an environment where they're not telling her that her Uncle Greg is going to hell, you know, and that's a very, you know, it's very sensitive. So it's something that I struggle with as well, you know, like where do we fit in all that, and how are we going to embrace that on our side, you know, and say like, yes, this is what is said, but
and I think that's what I'm finding is part of the adult journey is deciding for yourself what you believe, and then what faith that you feel is the best fit for you.
Definitely.
Not something everyone wants to hear, but it's doing yourself a service to admit the questions that you have, to ask the questions, do the research, and to find an environment where you are both comforted but also challenged.
And what we've heard this season too is it's accepted and affirmed. So ideally, you'd want a community that would accept you and then affirm you, and that's
depends on your working definition of those terms, but really you just want a community that affirms you, that recognizes, because accept to me is, we see you, we recognize you, you're allowed to join the club. Affirm means like, we want you involved and we want to honor your gifts, and that's on top of we accept you.
Mm-hmm.
Like affirm is like a whole
next step.
extra level.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a challenge, I think, in any church environment is at what point does someone who's joined this church be affirmed for their gifts and talents, regardless of sexual orientation? When do we lift up the people in our community and call them to serve?
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. So, kind of going back to your faith, do you think, who has had the biggest impact on your faith? Can you, has there been one big catalyst or one big person, or has it kind of been little people throughout the way? Has there been anybody that's, kind of kept you firmly on this Catholic journey?
That's a great question. The first person that comes to mind, honestly, is Father James Martin, which sounds like a canned answer now that he has, Father James Martin is the author of Building a Bridge, which is about furthering conversation between the LGBT community and the Catholic Church. And he's done great work to start the conversation in that exact way. But I will say, we go back. We go way back. And he's an author that I've always been really inspired by. The first book that I read of his was called My Life with the Saints. And if you haven't read Father James Martin, I always recommend that book first, because he weaves his own vocation story for the most part with the stories of the saints. And so each chapter is kind of this, kind of like we see in TV or film, like what we call cross-cutting, like you go between like two different plot points, or in like Handmaid's Tale or Lost, like you go between like the present day and then the past.
Yeah.
And so for him, it's this cross-cutting between his story and then the saints' story. And so for these saints who are from a time centuries gone past, he makes it relatable because he grounds it in a modern day story about his life and then connects it. So he's just been a really great driving force for me as a Catholic. His other major book is The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything. And that's where I get a lot, like The Examen, like I was saying before, is something he breaks down really well in that book. And then he also breaks down contemplative Ignatian spirituality. And what I mean by that is a major Jesuit practice is to imagine the scriptures, to sit and engage with them in prayer by reading them and then closing your eyes and imagining yourself as one of the characters in the story, whether that's being Jesus or the disciples or someone, an onlooker, whomever. But it's a powerful way of going back and relating to scripture and then forming your prayer out of it. What would Jesus say to me in this circumstance if I were at the feeding of the 5,000 and I was adamant that we don't have enough food here to feed all these people? Why am I so adamant about that? And what would he be challenging me to say? And what does that say about me today? Why do I doubt that we don't have enough on hand? Why am I coming at this from a view of scarcity instead of abundance? Like, you can start to break things down, and it opens up who you are today through the scriptures and unlocks this. And I love that. That comes from me studying film too. It's like I like seeing, I'm a visual person, and so closing my eyes and being in that space is a whole different experience. And so I've been really encouraged, I think for the first time, to put it simply, James Martin is someone who has engaged my prayer life actively as a Catholic and has engaged the ritual and the traditions through that. That has helped me grow over time.
Definitely. That's good. I know I've heard you talk about him over the years.
I could continue to gush about him.
I know.
and there are other theologians, but he specifically asked about Catholics as like James Martin for sure. And the fact that he wrote this book about conversation between the LGBT community and the Catholic Church, that was so affirming. I mean, to have like your favorite author, then like write something that you really want to be out there.
He's talking to you.
It was great, and we met once, and we've even emailed a couple times. But and so I really, I've just always enjoyed his presence
Hmm.
in the written word and in person.
Hmm.
He's a fantastic individual, and is a great example of being pastoral, and by that I mean caring towards others, understanding the people around him, and just responding to their needs, which we all can do better.
Definitely. And I feel like he was really kind of bridging that gap, kind of as I mean, maybe all of it's a little too late, but I feel like that was kind of happening on the cusp of marriage equality, and kind of when we were all asking these questions. I mean, because the book didn't come out like this past year. Like
It did come out this past
did
year.
it? Oh,
Well,
okay. I thought he did something
it
else.
feels like it's been out longer. It came out in June of 2017.
No way.
It's just barely been out a year.
I thought he did more works. Like I thought
He
this
gave a
has been a
talk.
path for
The
a
book is
while.
based on a talk that he gave. I believe it
Okay.
was in 2016
Okay.
with New Ways Ministry, and they presented him with a bridge building award, and then that spurred a talk that he entitled "Building a Bridge," which is then in this book, and like the transcript of that talk is essentially the meat of that book. Then he provides some discussion questions that go with it. But that's to say, he has been kind of a lightning rod, if you will, for
Mm-hmm.
like LGBT Catholics, because he has ministered to them, and that's what he
Yeah.
draws from in this talk, is that he has worked with LGBT Catholics in spiritual direction in small groups, probably in the confessional, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not something a Catholic priest can talk about. But he has been on the front lines, if you will, ministering to this community in particular, and so that's what he draws from to write that book.
Sure. So you kind of, one of my questions was, summarize what the Catholic Church says on homosexuality, which we already hit.
Sure.
So in going with that, do you find that to be consistent on the local level? So like I said, I know we touched on
Mm-hmm.
before, just because it is said doesn't mean that everybody, there's some things that we all just kind of agree to, let's just all
Yeah,
gloss
and
over
you're hitting
that.
on that accepting,
You know,
affirming difference there.
yeah. So what does that look like? Do you find that to be consistent on a local level, or
I mean, nothing's consistent right now.
yeah?
This is all so new, and the Catholic Church is not good at new things. And by that I mean, like, when I say this is new, I mean having this conversation is new. And
Hmm.
James Martin has sparked it in a big way. And there's been a lot of pushback from folks about it that are upset about what he has said, and that's another podcast into itself. But on the local level, I think it is. I think his book needs to. I think his book is a great starting point for
Hmm.
people, and it's actually something I recommended in a paper recently. Was that we, as individuals within Catholic parishes or just individual parishes in general, should probably sit down and, if they want to engage the LGBT community that probably exists within their community, they just may not be aware of it. If they want to engage those folks, this is a good that book provides a really good starting point. It provides scripture to point to.
Hmm.
It provides discussion questions related to that scripture. Some of the ones that I love in there are, we talked about identity earlier, and the question of how do you want to be called. And another one that I love is he talks about spiritual gifts.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not sure if it has to relate. I'm not sure if the scripture he cites. I think the scripture he cites is in 1 Corinthians, where we get the hymn "One bread, one body,"
Hmm.
that we are all comprising as individual members this one body of the church, and that's rooted in our spiritual gifts a lot of the time. And so, one of the questions he asks is, "What are your spiritual gifts, and what gifts would you like to bring to the church, or what gifts have you brought to the church?" And that's a great question to ask anyone. And what he's provided a model for, I think, is to sit down as a parish with LGBT Catholics in your parish, and to find, he's provided common ground. Those are questions that you can ask both sides. And anyone in a parish might be flattered to be asked, "What are your gifts? What can you bring to us?"
Hmm.
And on the same level, some people might be upset that it's taken this long for someone to ask, "What are your gifts and what do you want to bring to this community?" And so there can be joys and there can be frustrations on both sides of whether you're LGBT identifying or straight, there can be that common language
Mm-hmm.
as Catholics that we can build off of. And so I think that's a starting point on the local level. That's not something I'm seeing a lot of right now. We have a lot of work to do.
Definitely.
This book, while we're talking about James Martin, that book is a great starting point for people. It's not going to work for everyone. Some people just don't like James Martin. Like I said before, they think he's too simplistic, and his writing sometimes is a criticism I've heard. So you might get some people who just don't want to participate because they don't like James Martin. So we might need to find something that works for them too.
True.
There's not going to be one cure-all, and it's going to depend on your parish. Every parish has a different. I like to say every parish has a different charism. The
Mm-hmm.
parish I worked at, I also like to say it was a loud parish. People like to talk in that parish.
Mm-hmm.
We had a big commons that everyone gathered in after mass, and it was so loud in there because people were just loud. So that's a parish where I think people just need to talk, like a small group for allies and for LGBT folk to come together and talk, or people who want to be allies who don't
Mm-hmm.
know how to be an ally
Yeah, what
can
does
come
that look
together.
like?
What does that look like? That would be a good parish, I think, to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It may look different for another parish. It may look totally different. Maybe a retreat. It may be a class. Some people need to be educated and
Yeah.
then they're ready. We all learn differently too.
Very
So
true.
I think it depends on the parish, but that text is a great starting point. Conversation in general, and identifying each other, seeing each other, respecting each other. It has to start there.
Definitely. And I think it has to go back to a little bit what you said earlier of, I think, and we heard this a little bit in I know Kelsey's interview. One of the things I loved about it, what she said was, bringing that education piece and talking about it early and bringing it up.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a real area of opportunity for the Catholic Church, but then for a lot of religions. You can say that about a lot of things. Really bringing in those resources and getting that conversation early on a level where people can understand it. And if we start early, I think then it won't become such a big deal when everyone gets a little older. I don't know. I think it's important to start having those conversations early. I think that would be a real something I would like to see.
Me too. And I
changing.
think it would help, going back to the word gay, and I was talking about that at the beginning of this interview. I think it would help if churches addressed sexual orientation in their religious ed a little bit, or a lot of it, because it would help destigmatize it and help in the schools where bullying is prevalent, where as a country we're seeing shootings now on a regular basis and have been for a while. But at the heart of that, there's you're bringing there's mental health issues a lot of times going on, and there's misunderstandings, and anything we can do to help in that sense too. I mean, people that when you don't feel accepted, this is a stat our mother gave to us just yesterday over lunch. We were talking, and she was saying to me that in communities where LGBT individuals don't feel like they belong, where they're not affirmed, the risk of suicide or any self-harm, I don't know the percentage, but it increases dramatically when you're not accepted. And so anything we can do as a parish, I mean, if we're going to say, especially in the Catholic Church, being very pro-life, that has a lot of connotations to it. And abortion kind of gets thrown into as like the poster child for the pro-life movement. But if we are a pro-life church, and by that I mean like we want to preserve life around us and
on every single
on
level.
every level, then it would be good to honor each other's identities and to help educate on this piece of sexual orientation so that we can send our children back into school and be more understanding of other people. And that's all I'm asking for, is that we just listen and understand each other. If you don't agree with me on how I express my sexual orientation after we've sat down and talked, okay. That doesn't mean I'm not going to be friends with you. That doesn't mean I'm not going to
definitely.
say peace to you in the pew at church you go to a lot of Catholic churches, not every Catholic, but there's going to be a mix of political leanings in the pew, and we have to set that aside and be a body of Christ together, regardless of those things. We have to listen and understand, and it would be good to pass that on to the next generation, to start early, and to start. And this is one way. I don't want to get on a soapbox with
Yeah,
this, but this is one way to promote better understanding.
So kind of moving on, we've talked about the change that we would like to see in the Catholic Church a little bit. Kind of moving on, what do you plan on doing with your master's? Do you see yourself using that to impact change in the Catholic Church, or have you thought about that? Like,
I have thought about that. Yes.
I've thought deeply about what I'm going to do.
We all get this question. Yes, I think I don't know what it's going to look like quite yet. I'm halfway through my master's.
Yeah.
But I have really, ever since I started studying, wanted to bring back some form of understanding to the church that I get from this program. So something that I walked in really desiring was to see how other faith traditions viewed or discussed sexuality, like we were just saying on that education piece. So I really want to take what I can from other traditions and bring that back to the Catholic Church in whatever way I can. This podcast being one of those ways where I feel like this is a space where we can talk on the spectrum of where you identify sexually, but also where you identify with your faith, and we can create a dialogue. I think I'm hoping to pursue those kinds of interfaith dialogues that would apply to the Catholic Church, because we also need, not only do we need more conversation about sexuality, but we also just need more conversation about other faiths and recognizing each other, because at the end of the day, a lot of us are we believe some fairly similar things, and all of us are dealing with the same kinds of questions about our humanity and our purpose in life that we can work on together and share new perspectives on together. So I think I really want to call the Catholic Church to also be more open to having those kinds of interfaith dialogues, because when I've talked to friends from high school or friends now in graduate school, they're open to, they have questions about the Catholic Church and they want to know more about it. And sometimes it's, I love the ritual that you have and I want to know more about that, or I want to see how that relates to how we worship in my faith tradition. And so there is this curiosity, and my experience has been we have to be there to open the door and welcome people in, and that requires kind of putting ourselves in those spaces of other faiths. And so that's something that I'm really passionate about. What that looks like exactly, I'm not quite sure yet, but I do want to see what I can do from a lay Catholic perspective, and in order to help others, because I also think as Catholics, we kind of sometimes we limit what we read. I've noticed we limit what we read to other Catholics, or specifically to ordained Catholics. And lay Catholics, and by lay Catholics I just mean everyday run-of-the-mill Catholics, we can learn a lot from each other. And there are lay Catholics that have received outstanding education, that have a lot of answers to theological questions that are worth hearing, and that have helped shape our theology and our doctrine as the Catholic Church over the years. So honoring those voices is another passion of mine that we could definitely come to the table and show up for.
I love that. I think that's so important, because we're all facing, like you said, we're all facing the same questions. We're all trying to reinvent the same wheel. So why are you sitting in your corner reinventing the wheel over here? You're over here. You're over here. I feel like we're all trying to reinvent the wheel separately, when if we all just came to the same table and said, hey, so this is, nothing's full, but we've used this for our youth, and we've gotten positive feedback. It's worked for us. Okay, great. So how can we take that tweak it a little bit, and and move on just so it matches, because at the end of the day we all believe in the same core, the same core, like God, and then if you're Christian, Jesus. So we're all heading in the same direction. It's just a matter of how you get there. So I'd love to see everybody kind of pooling the resources and then taking it back out, because I think too often we get in our own SoundClouds and we just reverberate off each other, and we're not getting anywhere.
And it gets back to what we were saying earlier of not fully surrounding yourself in this homogenous environment.
Definitely.
And so anything we can do to move beyond that, and then to also, I think, recognize other marginalized communities and welcome them into, I think, is something. I don't want to just fight for the LGBT community exclusively. There are the same issues of exclusion with Catholics who have been divorced, or Catholics who, especially like young adult Catholics who have never been to a parish before, or are trying to figure out how to be an active adult engaged in the parish, but without a family yet. There are lots of ways that we don't, and when I say we, I mean like all of us, regardless of faith tradition. There are lots of ways that we can exclude people, and opening up that conversation is key. That doesn't mean you can't really have, and this is something that came up in Lee's interview, is that you can't really have a community with values and beliefs without excluding some people, right? I mean, like, you do at some point, if you're going to put a line in the sand and say, we believe that Jesus is our Lord and Savior, well, then anyone who doesn't believe in Jesus isn't going to show up on Sunday. So you are going to still inherently exclude some people, and you need to have some values to stand by for this organization to have some momentum, or else it's just like,
why are we
here? Yeah. So keeping that in mind, I don't want it to be this like nebulous, like, let's make sure we include everybody. But if we each look inside our communities locally and admit where we are weak and who we are potentially excluding, and it could be as simple as the homeless community that might be out on our streets near our church. How can we include them better? That was an issue we tackled at the church I was working at, and I'm glad we did that, because that was a local challenge that we all had to, if one of our brothers and sisters is out on the street looking for shelter, asking for food, asking for money, how am I helping them out? And that's something, when you're on the street corner and driving and you see that, your heart tugs for a reason, because that's someone you know. I mean, that's someone that you see and that lives among you, that is struggling. And so how can we be more attuned to those challenges in our community, and where are we specifically being called to respond? That's what we all can do a little better each day and with each encounter with one another.
I love that so much, and it wraps up very well into my conclusions. So so we've talked a lot about what we can do, and so as an ally, what that we haven't touched on already, or maybe whatever, but how can we as allies better help you and your community? What would you like to see from us? What does that look like? What does being an ally look like to you, I guess?
Oh boy. It comes back to that like open door mentality. And I'm really passionate about spiritual gifts. I really am. And so I think just honoring people's gifts is a great way to welcome them into your community, and to say, you're a great singer, or you're great at graphic design or something.
Or reading,
Yeah, and bring them in. And it's going to be different for every community. And this is regardless of, whether this is, like I said before, like whether this is a church or like a kayaking club, like whatever it is, like just honoring people's gifts. And even if you disagree with them, or are not necessarily like 100% on board with the LGBT movement, if you will, if you can honor someone's gifts, that's a step toward loving them and loving who God made them to be. So opening the door for that conversation, that's a start. Because if I know that that's important to you, being a new member to your organization, that we talk about identity and not wanting to be just Catholic or just gay or just whatever. But like our gifts and our passions and our talents and our desires, like those are wrapped up in almost all of what we do and where we end up someday. If we honor that, I think we truly honor one another. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Out Loud, especially as we bring our first season to a close. I'm sitting in the studio where we got started, and I am shocked that these are some of the last words I'll be recording in here for a while. I am so grateful to all of you who have reached out with your support and your feedback about this little project that we wanted to get started. We hope that this show continues to help make conversations about faith and sexuality in your own life happen. And while we take a break, as always, consider sharing this show with someone new as a way to start the conversation. While we get season 2 going, stay in touch with us, join our mailing list, and if you're able, make a contribution. You can hit the donate button on our website, and you can just learn more about what we're doing, as always, at OutLoudStories.com. A big thanks to Meg McEllen for being our host on this episode, for being my sister in life, and for her help in editing throughout this first season. And a special thanks to all of our guests this season: Zach Eccleston, Maria Machonsky, Kelsey Davis, Luther Young, and Lee Cato. You each helped make this show happen by trusting in its vision. Thank you for sharing yourself with all of us. That's all for this season of Out Loud. I'm your host, Greg Thompson, signing off until next time. Peace.